Welcome to Freedom's Foundation. I am the Constitution guy, and in my last episode I told you that I was going to cover self-interest this time around. But there's one last piece of foundation that I need to put into your constitutional knowledge before we can do that. What can I say? Don't blame me, blame YouTube and the 10-minute limit. So before we can get to some of that more fun and more complicated stuff, we need to finish this illustration that we started last time. Everything here is exactly the same as it was in the last video, except I did draw it just a little bit smaller because we're going to add to it this time. So we still have the 3 branches of the federal government up here, and the states are still here. And if we come down to this area, that's where we find the people of the United States. And the last time I checked, I think there was 310 million of us, so there are a lot of us. And one of our founders, James Wilson, said that the structure of our government is basically a pyramid. And if you look at it, he was right. At its most basic level, this is the structure of our government. The founders designed this structure very carefully to make sure that it provides the greatest possible protection for your freedom. So anything that alters or damages this structure in any way is probably unconstitutional, and it's definitely going to put your freedom in danger. I'm actually going to use this illustration quite a bit in my next few videos because, believe it or not, this little drawing can tell you most of what you need to know to interpret the Constitution properly. For tonight, what it's going to do is help us to understand the balance of power between the different levels of government. We the people are at the bottom of this pyramid because we are the source of political power. We should have the most power, and we make up the foundation of this country. So we also make up the foundation of the pyramid. Now if you move up one level, this is where you find your local governments. So that'd be your counties, your townships, city councils, those types of things. They can be trusted with the second most power because they're the closest to the people. So they understand the specific problems that our communities are facing, and they're the easiest for us to hold accountable. Our local governments are the easiest to hold accountable because, well, think of how you act at work. If you're like most people and you know that the boss is out of town, you're a lot more likely to maybe come in a couple minutes late or cut a couple corners here and there. But if you know the boss is looking over your shoulder, you're making sure to cross every T and dot every I and follow every single rule perfectly. Our politicians are the same way. In fact, the nonsense that you've been seeing coming out of the federal government for the last 20 or 30 years is a great example of exactly what happens when our politicians think that the boss isn't paying attention. With that in mind, let's look at our local officials. So think school board member or city council member. Those people are a part of our community, which means that they could run into you at the grocery store or at a high school football game. That makes it really easy for you to have your voice heard, and it also means that those people know that if they approve something that would take away your freedom or tax you way too much, they're probably going to have to justify it to your face. So that means that our local politicians are much less likely to do something that goes against the will of the people. On the other hand, our federal representatives aren't anywhere near that accessible. I mean, when's the last time you were at the store and you saw Nancy Pelosi or John Boehner? I mean, that's just never going to happen. Can you imagine what it would be like if you really did run into Nancy Pelosi at like Barnes & Noble or something? She'd be screaming at the clerk, "What do you mean I have to buy this book so I can find out what's in it?" The bottom line is this. Making decisions on a local level gives you as an individual the greatest opportunity possible to have a say in the laws that you live under. And that's really the goal with all this, isn't it? We want you to have as much control over your own life as you possibly can. If you keep moving up in the pyramid, that's when you get to your state governments. They're a little bit further away from the people, so they should get a little bit less power. They're a little bit harder for us to get a hold of, and they're not quite as familiar with the specific problems that our communities are facing. So, again, they get a little bit less power. Now, if you keep moving up in the pyramid, that's when you finally get to the federal government. It's the furthest away from the people, and they're incredibly hard to hold accountable. So they should get the least amount of power, but yeah, we haven't done so well on that one lately, have we? If you keep this illustration in mind, it's going to help you to remember that as the government gets further and further away from the people, we can trust it with less and less power. And again, that's because as the government gets further away from us, we start to lose more and more control over what it does. Now, next week, I'm going to go over how the founders used self-interest to their advantage in creating our government. I'm also going to show you what the role of this federal government was really supposed to be. Seriously, this time, I promise, I'm really going to go over that stuff. Blame the YouTube limit, don't blame me. But this next video is where things are really going to start making sense for you, and we're really going to start having some fun. So trust me, you do not want to miss this next video.